the Platyhelminthes notes, which are flatworms. So the phylum Platyhelminthes is the flatworms. That's the common name for this phylum. General characteristics include that they have an unsegmented body, they have bilateral symmetry, they're flattened dorsal ventrally, which you can see here means they're like squished, like flat in that direction versus like a fish would be flattened the opposite way. So some are considered free living and others are going to be parasites, and they'll be found in marine or freshwater or live in moist places on land. But they're going to be somewhere where there's some water, right? For physiology or anatomy of them, they're aclomate, meaning they don't have a cloam, so they do not have a body cavity. So each of our worm phylums, each one's different. So the nematodes that we talked about have a pseudocloam. Earthworms or annelids are going to have a cloam, and then these guys are going to be without a body cavity or a clomate, right? So a cloam is a fluid-filled cavity between the gut and the outer body wall that contains and supports all the internal organs. It's usually formed when the mesoderm splits into two sheets of tissue that separate it to form an internal cavity lined on both with the ectodermal and the endodermal side by mesodermal tissue. In aclomates, there's no space surrounding the internal organisms, and it's just an area that's fluid with mesodermal tissue instead. Right? So for their response system or their nervous system, they do have what's called cephalization, which is a concentration of sense organs and nerve cells at the front of the animal's body, or considered a head. So we now are still working with animals that have heads now versus like jellyfish and sponges and stuff did not have that distinct end of their body that was considered a head. The head encloses several ganglia, which are groups of nerve cells that control the nervous system. It's not complex enough to be considered a brain, but we're evolving through these animals on our way to getting to a brain here eventually, right? So you can see this diagram here. The ganglia are here. They kind of look just like tiny little brains. And then you have the two nerve cords that go down each side of the body, right? They look like they have eyes near the anterior end of their body or on their head, but each eye isn't a true eye. It's actually an eye spot that detects changes in the amount of light in the environment. And they always kind of look like they're cross-eyed. For feeding, some are free living, meaning they're not a parasite. They are going to be carnivores and prey on small invertebrates, and they'll do this by entangling them with their body and covering them in mucus. They have a muscular tube called a pharynx, which they extend the pharynx out of their mouth, and then the pharynx will pump food into the body cavity, or into their body. Where food is digested by cells of the gut. The pharynx is located in the center of their underside, so kind of picture like where your belly button is where their pharynx is, and they just have a tube that extends out. So picture a tube coming out of your belly button, and that's where you eat your food. Lunch at school be very more disgusting, that's it, right? For parasitic flatworms, they're going to obtain nutrients from foods that have already been digested by the host that they're in, and they'll feed on blood, tissue, fluids, or pieces of cells within the host body. For movement, they're going to move by contracting their muscles, and they'll glide over rocks or undulate through the water. So they just kind of have this wavy pattern in the videos you'll watch. You'll kind of see they kind of just glide through the water. They do have a well-developed muscular system, and it's comprised of layers of circular, longitudinal, and diagonal muscles that's close to the epidermis. So their muscle system is much more evolved than that of nematodes, right? For excretion, some are going to have what are called flame cells that are specialized cells that filter and remove excess water from the body. And here's some diagrams of what a flame cell looks like. And they're all found throughout like the sides of their body and just help them get rid of excess water and filter out things. So kind of act like almost like a kidney in a way, but not as advanced to be enough to be like called a kidney, right? For reproduction, most are going to be monoeciduous, meaning they'll contain both. They'll produce both eggs and sperm. There will be some that reproduce asexually, and they'll do this by fission, which is when they'll divide off into two different body parts. Right? They are capable of regeneration, and regeneration refers to the process by which plants and animals replace lost or damaged parts by growing them anew. And so, for instance, in this diagram here, we have a flatworm. It was decapitated, and it eventually, over 2 weeks, regrew everything it needed. And then this one here, it's eventually it ended up regrowing like incorrectly, or it's about to undergo fission and split into two worms. Right. Here's a diagram of these guys, of where everything is located. This has some stuff that we don't need to know, but just to give you an idea, that this says eye, but it should say eye spot. The ganglia are up here, ovaries are here. The testes are found kind of throughout it, as you can see, and this one is kind of a better quality. So ovaries are found throughout, testes kind of alternates down the body. So, all right. Moving on, there are 3 classes of flatworms we're going to cover. There's Turbellaria, Trematode, and Cestoda are the 3 classes you need to know. So Turbellaria is the first one, and includes marine flatworms and planarians. They are non-parasitic, or mostly non-parasitic. They're pretty much all free-living worms. And they're going to be found mostly on the bottom of rocks or in leaf litter if you're out like in the woods or something, right? Their mouth is located in the middle of the ventral side, where what we already talked about, and it's inserted into prey. And then the food will be partially digested externally before it's sucked back into the gut. They'll crawl over a trail of mucus that is secreted by a specialized epidermal cells, so they'll leave like almost like a slug kind of thing. Then we have what are called polyclads within this group, and they're the marine flatworms, and they're very diverse in what they look like and their colors. They're actually kind of pretty, I think. Right. Moving on to the class Trematode, this includes parasitic flukes, and these guys will have 1 or 2 suckers that help attach itself to the host, and many flukes can infect humans and cause a lot of diseases. Right? They'll have complex life cycles that involve 1 or more hosts before reaching the adult stage. For instance, this diagram is on the sheep liver fluke, which infects sheep. You can see here, I know this picture is of terrible quality. Even if this wasn't a video, it's terrible quality. But we have adult flukes that are in the sheep's bile duct. The eggs are passed out of the body with feces, and then obviously they land on the ground. The embryo hatches from the egg and enters the digestive gland of a small snail host. So we have the snail here. So they get a little older there. And then eventually they're on the grass again, and where sheep can eat it, and it goes on and on. Right? So they will need multiple hosts throughout their life cycle, and they have a primary host, which is where the organism will reproduce sexually, and then an intermediate host where the organism which the embryos develop into larvae. So like the last example, we had a sheep and a snail as our 2 different hosts. So they're always going to have a primary and an intermediate host. Right? So here's just another diagram of that. This one has a snail again, and then a human host. So it starts off the mature fluke and blood vessels of the intestines in a human, and then the blood fluke reproduces sexually in the human host. So that's going to be the primary host. And fertilized eggs exit out the host in feces. Then the eggs develop in water into ciliated larvae, which just means they have little hair-like structures on the side, and then get into snails. And then the snails, this is where asexual reproduction will occur within the snail, and develop into another motile larval, like a different type of larval than we had over here. And then that will penetrate into the skin and blood vessels of the humans and repeat the cycle. Right? One disease that's caused by flukes is cychistomyces. I know I'm saying that incorrectly, and I apologize. It's caused when the fluke's eggs clog blood vessels, causing swelling and tissue decay in lungs, liver, spleen, and intestines. So it causes like your abdomen to swell up real bad like that. Right. Moving on to the class Cestoda, this includes tapeworms. They are long, flat, parasitic worms adapted to life inside the intestines of a host. They have, for their anatomy, their head's called a scolex, and it contains suckers or hooks, and they're used to attach the worm to the intestinal wall, where it's going to absorb nutrients from the host intestine. So you can see a close-up here of what that looks like. All right. Then they have proglottids, which are segments that make up most of the worm's body. So you can hear a little section of the worm here. Mature proglottids will contain both male and female reproductive organs. So you can kind of see here, it's not a great quality picture, but it is what it is. But it has ovaries and testes in each section of the worm. Right? Mature proglottids can break off to be passed out of the host in the feces, and they actually can wiggle around like an adult worm does a little bit, which is just kind of gross. Right? So the class Cestoda in our pets, cat and dog tapeworms, proglottids/eggs, are eaten by fleas who are the intermediate host. So the fleas are the intermediate host. Your cat or your dog will lick themselves and swallow the flea that contain the tapeworm larvae, where it matures into the adult tapeworm. And then the cycle will just keep repeating itself. So that's why it's important to, protect your pets and, prevent fleas and everything to help also with tapeworms. So veterinarians have both injections and pills to rid your pet of tapeworms if they've got one. And you want to prevent tapeworms by getting rid of fleas and doing flea prevention for your animals, especially if they're outdoor animals where they're likely to get fleas from. Right? For humans, food or water can be contaminated with tapeworm eggs, and it's eaten by cows, fish, or other intermediate hosts. They'll then hatch and burrow into the muscle tissue of the host and remain in a dormant stage, which is called a cyst. The human will then eat the undercooked intermediate host, and then the tapeworm will grow into the adult stage. So we have a kind of a picture of here. We have the tapeworm, the proglottids break off into the grass. The cows eat the grass. It burrows into the muscles of the cow. We then decide, hey, we want a burger or some other beef product, and that is undercooked and doesn't kill off the cyst, and then we get a tapeworm. Right. This picture is of a tapeworm, and you can see that it's just taken over. All of these little white dashes are tapeworms. So it's kind of gross, right? So Platyhelminthes in humans, they may be transmitted from host to host through consumption of contaminated food and water, or by putting anything in your mouth that's touched like the feces of an infected person or animal. 40 to 50 million people are infected with one or more of these tapeworm or parasites, like a year, I think it is. Right. So one way that it's possible to get them is with raw food. So parasites will be in the larval stage, and they'll be consumed in uncooked or undercooked. Unfrozen seafood can definitely prevent a human health risk. So food preparation is very key here. I'm no expert in this area, but just some standard guidelines for red meats and poultry should reach an internal temperature of 160 to 180 degrees, respectively, to kill off parasites. But also freezing things can also kill them off. So you want to freeze, which is -4 degrees Fahrenheit or below for 7 days, or go -31 degrees Fahrenheit or below for 15 hours of fish intended for raw consumption also kills parasites. So that's why it's really important to prepare your food properly, or one of the reasons, rather, is to make sure you're not getting any kind of tapeworm. All right. Well, that is it of the Platyhelminthes notes. As always, just let me know if you have questions.